Hello, I'm Sylvia Syret, and this is my little podcast. I'm interviewing, or more like I'm having a little chat with my friend Zita today. Zita, hello, welcome.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, so lovely to see you. Can you please say your full name for me? You've taught me. I try. It's Tulyahikayo.
Very good. Yes. So
Ah,
my
there you go.
my name is Zita Tulyahikayo. That's not the full name,
Tulyahikayo.
but that's the short version. Yes.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, so I would like you to introduce yourself, what you do with your work, what your focus is with your work as a coach, as a family constellations facilitator, and so on.
So yes, I am trained as a clinical hypnotherapist, and then I trained in shamanic coaching in California. And then I was fortunate enough to come across systemic family constellations, which was so amazing. I decided, well, I'm going to train in this well. And that was really the game changer. I'm also trained in systemic organizational coaching and systemic family therapy and trauma therapy, NLP, and two chairs and mindfulness. So all of these things come into the pot, and I never know quite which I'm using, but they've kind of come together to create what I call life therapy with Zita.
Yeah, yeah. I came across you through the Center of Is it the Center of Excellence, or was it the some London organization?
Oh, Center for Systemic Constellations, which was the foundation school
Ah,
of
yes.
constellations work in the United Kingdom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's, I think, how I saw you and met you online or saw you online. I've been following you on Instagram, I've been following you on LinkedIn, and I'm just in awe of the way you use your words, Zita. That's why I'm having you here today. Because the things you say, I find them quite deep, quite revolutionary, and it often deeply resonates with how I would like to be able to, word things.
Well, thank
And
you.
the basic thing that sort of got me, yeah, the basic thing that got me thinking that I would like to talk with you about is the theme of racism.
Hmm. That's a theme, and it seems to be
And
quite prevalent now.
it's a theme.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, would you be happy to do that with me today?
Absolutely. It seems that with or without my consent, it is a theme that I've been called upon to talk about quite a bit, and particularly in the last year and a half since the death of George Floyd. And it's an honor and a privilege to do so because I feel that we need to talk about it. It
Yeah.
affects us all.
Yeah. Yes, I was trained at OTS Oxford Therapy Center. Well, trained is maybe a little bit of the wrong word, but we had a session on white fragility, and I came away deeply, deeply humbled and a little bit, well, I wanted to say ashamed, but ashamed is not the right word. Shame has kind of no space in my thinking anymore so much, but with a much deeper awareness of how I am or have been racist in my life, even though I was thinking of myself as not racist.
Interesting.
And it was, yeah, and it was basically because I haven't read um, books by colored or black people. I have no, not many friends, many colored or black friendships. There's so much in my life that where I notice that I'm probably shying away from, I don't know, to be honest. maybe you can enlighten me a little bit how this might be happening for somebody like me.
Well, I think the first thing we need to consider in very real and practical terms, because this often gets forgotten, for a very, 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 very long time now, the northern hemisphere of the world has been dominated by what is often described or referred to as white people. And it is in more recent times that there have been people coming to Europe and England from other places. And actually, the number of us in Northern Europe is still incredibly small. The population of Black people in the United Kingdom is 3%. That's about 1.9 million. So if you think out of 66 million people, while we're up to 69 million people, the chances of coming across a Black person, making friends with them naturally is understandably quite rare. Not just for you, but for many people. So I don't think that's necessarily an indication of one being racist. If the percentages were different and one was going out of one's way to avoid coming into contact with people who were different from ourselves, that might be a different thing. But I mean, I don't come into contact with that many Black people, Asian people, and I don't think that makes me racist either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Okay.
there is that, and I'm fascinated by the notion of white fragility, because I tend to think as humans, we're all rather fragile, which is why we are drawn to this deep need to belong. We want to belong to assure our survival. And part of our belonging is we find groups that are similar to us, namely our family. That's the first port of call of our fragility or sense of fragility being eased and our sense of safety gaining a certain degree of security and confidence that life is intrinsically safe. And so in the nature of human beings and actually in the nature of animals, that which looks different, and we are visual creatures, is usually the first alarm of an indication that the other person might be different. So with belonging, there's a what some might call the dark side to belonging, which is I'm going to feel safer and more comfortable around people who look like me, who speak like me, worship the same gods that I do, and eat similar food. And it's not particular to white people. It's prevalent amongst Indians in the subcontinent of India. It's prevalent amongst Africans, of which there are multiple ethnicities. It's prevalent amongst people of the Caribbean too. And in that sense, one might say, therefore, that we are all racist. It's a tricky one because the word racism has started to actually lose its meaning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you for that. What is racism?
Well, racism is the assumption originally that one is superior to another group of people based on skin color.
Mm-hmm.
All humans have that.
Yeah,
It is
yeah,
not,
that
it's not unique
yeah.
to white people by any stretch of the imagination.
Yes,
And
I
if
listened to a very interesting masterclass of yours not too long ago, and you talked about your own history, where you grew up, and the people, your people, and that was absolutely fantastic to hear and interesting and such an eye opener. And on the lines of what you just said, we are all racist.
yeah, in a sense, we are.
But of course, there's this. Go on.
Um, in a sense, we are, but as you know, in constellations work and systemic constellations thinking, we're looking at the trauma of oppression more often in people. So racism comes under the banner of oppression. It's not particularly unique in that regard. We are oppressed by others and we oppress ourselves in some way, shape, or form. And racism as a whole is become somewhat complex, but it's not a new phenomena. And at the current trajectory, nor will it be an old one either.
Yeah. So there's always been this notion in me that I'm not racist. And then I'm doing a workshop and I'm feeling, well, maybe I am. I'm not convinced though. As a systemic facilitator like you, I see things in a systemic way, and I see things from trauma, from a trauma point of view, from the background of a person. And when I meet people, I see a person and I see color. And yes, and I guess I have sometimes a thought like, there's a group of Black people, and I'm thinking, "Oh, I would like to get to know them. How do I do that?" And that's not racist. That's being interested. But there's also a sort of a sense of not knowing how to.
Well, I can understand that. A few years ago, I was traveling in Peru, and there sitting on a green was a group of Quechuan women. And I thought, I'd really like to get to know them. But how do I do that? They speak a different language to me, they are dressed differently, their hair, their clothes, everything is different. And we have a desire as humans to make contact, and we're naturally, as humans, curious. But does the not knowing how to make contact with someone who is obviously from a different group make us racist? I don't think it does. And, there are many ways in which oppression can arise. I wasn't raised by my parents to believe that I was less than because of the color of my skin. And there was certainly very little about my upbringing as a child that led me to believe that I was any more oppressed than anybody else growing up in England in the 1970s. But if I open a newspaper today, I won't name any names, but they will tell me that I am oppressed purely based on the color of my skin. So the oppression itself often can arise or manifest in often from the people or groups who think or believe that they have good intentions or that they are on the moral high ground. There's a certain honesty when someone says, "You're different. I'm not sure if I like you because I don't know you." And somehow we've managed to make this a crime. Now, it's not necessarily pleasant when it happens, but it is true. We all are thinking it in some way. We all make judgments about people because they have different choices or different beliefs, or they drive horse and pony traps instead of driving cars. So,
Can you just repeat the last sentence?
or as I was saying, we can judge people because they continue to live in a certain way and they drive horse and trap vehicles rather than driving, gas guzzling cars. So, as a systemic thinker, I'm not inclined to judge anybody as better than or less than. And I certainly don't believe that a racist is less than or better than me. They're just another human who's loyal to something else. And usually the manifestation of racism, as we call it, is because those people are themselves victims of racial trauma, and so they become the perpetrators of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. How can we, as common people, overcome racism in the UK, I must say, because that probably is different for different places in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think in the UK, for the most part, we already have. It's really only kept alive in politics and mainstream media. And that's got more to do with
Yeah.
the structure of large institutions that want to manage people in a certain way. They rest on what's called closed systems, keeping people insecure, fearful, or in doubt, or feeling that life is not safe, can't be trusted. But having lived here pretty much all my life and having been born there, I would say from where we were in the 70s to where we are now is like night and day.
Mm.
There are very few places that I don't feel safe. I'm sure I could find places where I don't feel safe. It wouldn't necessarily be because of the color of my skin.
Mm-hmm. Are there places where you would rather not go, for example, in London?
Yes. Oxford Street at 12 o'clock on a Saturday night isn't a particularly pleasant place to be. That's mostly because a lot
Probably
of
not for
people,
anyone, I guess.
right. And that's not really to do with race, that's more to do with the effect that mood altering drugs have on people.
Yeah. Mm.
You know, I will give a
Yes. Yeah.
wide berth to a group of young women who are walking barefoot at that time of night. The barefoot tells me that things are already a little out of control. And my
Yeah.
inner instinct is to move away from people who are out of control. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
particularly a big fan of large gatherings. That may be more to do with my age rather than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. So I, as a little person with very little money to spend in my life, where do I put my money? Because that is what drives our economy and everything, doesn't it? And that's how we as a society keep everything going, the suppression and oppression. Where do I put my money in terms of spending it, in terms of ending racism?
In terms of ending racism through financial means,
Mm.
that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure I've even thought of that question myself. I think it's more really about uh, how we behave. If
Mm.
we want to end racism, it means that I feel ending it both ways. That's radical inclusion. So, for example, we can see what happens when we suppress uh, fascism, for example, from the past. It will pop up somewhere else. And usually the place where it reemerges is in the group that were victims of it to begin with, which is why we're in
Yes.
what's called a drama cycle between victims, perpetrators, and helpers, and they are constantly moving around each other. The ideal thing is to step outside of the drama. Just don't be racist. Anti-racists and racists are united with the same love, which is for racism. In the absence of
Yeah.
racism, there is no home for
Mm-hmm.
the racist or the anti-racist. Together, they keep racism
Yeah.
alive. And currently, racism is big
Yes.
business.
That's very profound. Yeah. Mm. Go on, tell me more.
Well, I mean that, and even I'm aware, the more I get invited to give talks or share about racism, I'm generating an income from talking about something, and therefore I'm part of perpetuating it, albeit that I'm highlighting why it's still alive. So, in that regard, I'm joined the system. For the most part, in my
Very
day-to-day
interesting.
life, I'm outside of the system. My household is multicultural. My family is multicultural. You know, one of my relatives has blonder hair and bluer eyes than you, and another of my relatives has very, very dark skin, and very, very short, thick, curly hair. And then there's everything else in between. And um, in that realm, depending on which family member I'm with, I'm either a Ugandan or a Barbadian. And if I'm a Barbadian, then I am a Barbadian who's from the countryside. And if I'm a Ugandan, I join with my tribe or with my nation. So this idea of belonging is constantly shifting because we belong to so many groups all the time. And
Yes.
in our belonging to one group, the moment I'm sort of over here with the Ugandans, well, it's a new we, and the Barbadians are them. And same when I go over to my mother's side. And for me, learning to build the bridges between these two, because the external world shows me that they don't necessarily get on, is the solution I found to living peacefully with the other and celebrating difference. I'm glad you're different. I'm glad your skin looks different to mine. I'm glad mine looks different to yours. There's something wonderful about that diversity in life. Similarly, there's something really beautiful about the diversity of thoughts and beliefs. And some might say, in the
Mm,
absence of certain things, like if we remove water and rain and take it away, well, how would we ever really appreciate what it is to feel dry? How would we know it? How would we have the
mm,
texture of this is good, this is wonderful? As humans, we'd go out there for and look for the opposite so that we could appreciate the thing that we have. And we often seem to forget this small, granular perception and understanding. We appreciate being loved and held by people we care about because we know that there are people who are indifferent to us. In the same way, neither you or I can really know how we feel about the gentleman riding his bike in Kerala at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That doesn't make us racist towards him because we aren't
yeah.
consumed by his lived experience and his truth. We don't know him.
Mm, mm. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, that sums it up really nicely. I don't even know what to say anymore about this. I'd rather wrap this up here and now and say racism goodbye. Yeah, that's how I feel. That's how I feel. And again, you put it in such beautiful words. There's nothing to add to that.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
Go on if you have anything to add.
uh, well, interestingly, belonging to a group that is frequently told that they are the only ones who experience racism or oppression or so on and so forth. Within my family, I have people who are from Pakistan or who are from India or who are from Ireland. And connecting to them and listening to their stories, I am reminded that discrimination or prejudice is not particular to Black people or people of colour. Some of the things historically that have happened to the Scottish, the Welsh, the Irish, the Pakistanis, the Indians, the Bangladeshis, the Bhutanese, everybody around the world has experienced an oppression or discrimination of some kind and has been the perpetrator of it. It's as I was saying before, in that it's universal, perhaps how we start to bring down the barriers is rather than us focusing solely on ourself and our experience, we find compassion for those others who aren't front and center in the media and explore how do we support them? How do we
Yeah,
welcome them? How do we welcome their difference? How do
yeah,
we acknowledge their difference to us and feel into the tension of what that's like?
Yes, that's yeah, that takes me to another question. Um, well, because of this workshop I did that was called White Fragility, I was very aware that I would probably, and it feeds into what you've said before, but I noticed that I would probably not look for a colored therapist, not necessarily unless I know them and know and feel safe with them. I would not look on the internet going down a list of faces. I would probably choose a white face.
Right.
That was interesting for me to realize. And of course it is the other way around as well. Would a colored person come to me if they didn't know me, or maybe even if they knew me in a therapeutic setting?
Well, what I find interesting about that question is that I think, on some sense, it's not just the color of skin that's informing our decisions or our process. It's something about a feeling, and that's so many, oh, there are thousands of them, sound bites of information that we are taking in at any one given moment. It's the slant of an eye, the shape of a nostril, the slight pull of one side of the face over the other. These are all clues. And they're not just clues related to the surface color of people, but they are clues to similarities of facial expressions that we have learned to interpret as safe, kind, unsafe, agreeable, unagreeable, domineering, passive. The list is endless. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a Black therapist.
Mm.
Very few of my clients are Black. What I do find interesting is a lot of them are Jewish. Now I have Jewish in
What?
my are Jewish.
Ah, yes.
Now I
Interesting.
have Jewish in my ancestry.
Yeah.
And I've often joked to other family members, it's as if I have a sign that says, Jews are welcome here.
That's interesting.
And I'm
Okay.
warmly receptive to all people. What's interesting is
Of course you are. Of course
when
you
I
are.
do have Black clients, I notice that they are nearly always from my mother's island.
Wow, yeah, that I see that's great. Yeah.
Do I look Barbadian? Are the Jamaicans discriminating against me because I don't look Jamaican? I mean, these superficial clues, which are often used to inspire people to feel guilty or ashamed of who they are neither helpful or kind. We're
Yeah.
far more complex as human beings than that. And
Yes.
we're not
Yes.
making decisions solely based on the color of somebody's skin.
Mm. Great. Good to hear too. Yeah. Very good to hear and very interesting. Feeds into my learning. I am learning.
And I
This
will
is,
go a little further.
yeah, go
This
on.
may make you feel a little uncomfortable. This
Yeah.
surgence of white fragility, if anything, has exacerbated racism.
That's exactly what I've been reading in your posts on LinkedIn. That interests me.
Well,
Yes.
if we look at sort of what's going on, ultimately it makes it all about white people. Either they're fragile or they're privileged. The unspoken message, therefore, being that Black people have no privilege and they're not fragile. I'd say that there are a lot of fragile Black people. They can be
Mm.
easily disrupted by someone calling them a name.
Hmm. Yeah.
Now, that in itself is an indication of fragility being universal. Now, I'm not offended by somebody calling me a nigger. I'm not one. It doesn't stick. Similarly, if someone called me a fat cow, I probably wouldn't be offended because
Mm.
I'm not fat and I'm not a cow. But I have a a strong sense of my worth and my value. That is a privilege as a Black person to have, and I'm aware of that.
Yes. So yeah. So that is in in the therapeutic setting. It is about looking for the healing that happens in therapy is looking for the past trauma, basically the past experiences of where we come from, because of epigenetics, what has been passed down, and the unresolved things that need addressing and haven't been yet. So all of that is the work.
Yes, and that work in terms of white fragility is probably really about racial trauma for white people.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's just it's go on.
you're German, correct?
Yes.
So in your recent historical trauma, you belong to a group that were elevated as Aryans and de-elevated other white people to essentially wogs. Anybody who wasn't German was kind of in between Black and the pure master race. Both, whether you are
Yes.
grouped with the pure master race or the white who were superior before, who've been made inferior by the system of fascism, that's racial trauma. And when we
Yes.
experience trauma, we're going to kick it along to whoever else in whatever way feels appropriate. So there's a fragility in the sense that what's not being acknowledged is the racial trauma that white people have experienced, whether it's because of having superiority, perhaps that they didn't really in their hearts identify, imposed upon them, or whether it's because they're English and they fought to defend against the persecution of another group of white people. Can you see where this is going? It gets very complicated in terms
Yes.
of the loyalties, the differences in religion, the differences in belonging, and then another submerged layer, which was the trauma in Europe prior to that, which was a result of the split between the Anglo-Saxon church and the Catholic church. And the Catholic church's decision to exclude people who weren't pure white Catholic, whilst at the same time being aware that many of them may have Jewish in their ancestry and definitely Moors. So these cycles of racial trauma have been running for a very, very long time, and there is no group that is exempt. The original word slave, I think, comes from the word Slav. And the Slavs were the original slaves. They weren't black or brown.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I'm amazed by your historical knowledge. I'm learning so much from you.
Well, history was my degree at university.
Well, I have no I was crap at history. I'm not retaining any information in my brain, but yeah, it's fascinating to hear and very, very interesting. Yeah. I wonder whether you have this masterclass available to people who want to actually look at that, because you talk about your history and you talk a lot about the history of movement um, in your country where you come from, and how it came about. And I found it absolutely amazing to listen to. Is
Yes,
that available still?
it is available. I'm just trying to figure out how to edit it. And then if I have the rights of ownership to share it publicly, or how I go about that. It's all a bit loose at the moment. But I will, once we head into August and, therapists get a whole 4 weeks off, have time to tend to some of these things. That is
Yes.
my
Oh,
that
wow.
is
That
my
would be
goal.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Good to know. Yeah, I would love to watch that again, just because I was just listening and mesmerized, and of course I can't remember much, but it was it wasn't only entertaining, it was really, really helpful. And the way you create understanding about racial difference and movement and trauma, and it's all very, very enlightening. So yeah,
Well,
I
thank
guess
you.
that's where we need to put our money.
Or energy. Well, money, yes, because money is just the energy of love, really. We give love, and in return, we receive money for the thing that we've given with love. Um,
Yeah.
but I think this, for me, it's really why the systemic work is so valuable and so important. And perhaps giving money is investing in yourself and your capacity to offer it, so that we can support more people to a deeper understanding of themselves, where they've come from, and releasing the traumas from the past, so that, for the future generations, whether one is an ancestor biologically or an ancestor, as I am, as a step parent, to pass new messages and new stories that are helpful and invite confidence rather than invite fear, doubt, and insecurity.
Hmm.
That's a big hill to climb, but I like to believe in the impossible.
Oh,
Why
yes. Yeah.
not?
Yeah. I think that's the only way to keep going in these very challenging times.
Yes. And currently, capitalism has managed to give itself a huge global boost, so it will be even stronger and more powerful than ever before. And so, under the umbrella of it is where we find our space, our place to bring our voices and share with love.
Hmm. Yeah, that goes down like honey. Yeah, absolutely. Playing the system in the way that we create more love, more ripples.
We are the system.
Being we are the system and being playful within it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. One more question. When somebody comes to you who has been um, subjected to a racist attack, or maybe have you worked with people in that way?
Well, that's a beautiful and very interesting question, which takes us a little bit into neuroscience. So, often racist attacks, in current definition, uh, outside of verbal slurs, are rare. They can manifest as microaggressions, or believing that one has been discriminated against, or finding evidence, but they rarely come with tangible evidence. Often it's a look or a slant or a feeling, or I just know, as we would call that, a projection. So, what I really invite my clients to do is to surface the original trauma, which often is historical and has been passed down the line. You know, my first racial attack was watching Roots. Now, the intention of the
Oh,
film was to help and to educate. But at 8 years old, that was perhaps the most traumatic thing that I had ever seen. And then 12 years a
goodness
slave
me. Yeah.
compounded that trauma, because we, again, in the realm of belonging, we form affinities with people who look like us. But actually, I slow it down and I think practically and realistically about it, how likely is it that what happened in Roots, or 12 years a slave, happened every single day to every single Black person for 400 years? It may well have done, but if that is so, and it may well be, then the healthy place is, wow, my ancestors survived that. I must be a super being.
Yeah, I like that. Funny enough, I had so my grandfather was a weapon SS man, so a very, elite soldier. I don't know much about his history at all, unfortunately. What I do know is that he was captivated in Siberia and held there for about 8 years. And just recently, through a meditation journey, I sort of found myself in his skin somehow, and going through the madness of being captivated, but also the part where he was chosen to be an SS man because of his looks, basically, and his stature. He had no choice whatsoever. He was chosen, and I felt all that. And what come out of this meditation was that I'm well, he was a survivor. He came out of that alive, and he made a living, and he created beautiful children. And even though I would not say that I would probably have to admit that members of my family from my father's side have racist thoughts, at least, and have expressed in the past racist beliefs. And I grew up within them. Not my parents so much, but I have been objected to that. Um, I think life has gone on really beautifully, to be honest, with everyone coming from my generation, at least. And I find myself talking to Jewish people, Jewish therapists, and working with my shadows with Jewish people, and realizing that we were all sort of taken within a wave that wasn't personal. It was a
Yes,
collective wave.
yes. Well, as we know, group conscience tends to override individual conscience.
Yeah.
We're seeing it now.
So yeah, when you said yes, we do. We see that, yes. So I like the thought of that we are survivors, and what are we going to do
Yes. And
with that beautiful life that we have?
and then what's important to remember is that in our family history, all of us, there will be perpetrators and victims. And often perpetrators and victims find each other through a shared love and create life from that place. You know, my father is descended from slave sellers who made a huge amount of money selling people into slavery, many of whom ended up in the part of the world where my mother is from. And that these two should find each other through Windrush in the northeast of England is to me rather poetic. And I know that even in my mother's ancestry, you know, there's my great 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 grandfather who was an overseer. He wasn't brought as a slave to the Caribbean. And he had horse and trap, and he wore a frocked coat. And I thought about this. I was like, frocked coat, horse and trap. Well, he had superiority too, and he was brought from an elite African tribe. So every group has, these hierarchies that existed in the past within their family system. And sometimes the outrage can be the loss of the elite state or numerous other reasons. But none of us come from people who are wholly innocent or wholly guilty. And we as individuals are not wholly innocent or wholly guilty. And when we can, touch into that. There's a place of humility and compassion where we can reach out to people now who, for our parents, were on the other side. That's the healing that it sounds like you are doing, and that's wonderful.
Yes, yeah, yeah. It is. It is. It is magic. If I find it quite magical, I must say, this is my favorite word. What a magic life.
It really is pretty extraordinary when we take it down to the beauty and the simplicity of it. In fact, I often say, if the world or life was so simple that humans could understand it, we'd be too stupid to realize.
Oh, very nice. I would like to end our little conversation here. I
Well,
want to
thank you.
thank you so much for coming along and doing that with me.
It's been
And
an
I
absolute
hope I
pleasure.
see you. Thank you. And I hope I see you again, maybe for a different theme. I'm sure you have a lot to offer, and maybe one day I'll come back to you and ask you about everything about trauma.
It sounds good. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute privilege and honor to be here, and so lovely to talk to you, my friend Sylvia.
Thank you, Zita. That lands. Thank you. Okay, so on that note, thank you very much for listening, for watching this if you're looking on my website, and bye bye. Till next time. Now I need to find the button.
Stop recording.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go.